There are stories that live in the quiet spaces, in the gaps between what we see and what we choose to ignore. This story begins not with a scream, but with a quiet, bureaucratic click of a ballpoint pen. July 2013. A 19-year-old named Jamie Parsons walks into the Salisbury Police Department with his uncle. He's there to report his little sister Erica missing. The officer asks the routine question, "When did you last see her?" Jamie's answer is not routine. November 2011. The officer's pen stops. The date hangs in the air-conditioned office air. Almost 2 years. The officer leans forward. "Why the delay?" Jamie explains, his voice a mix of fear and resignation. He'd asked his parents, Casey and Sandy Parsons, about Erica's whereabouts for months. They told him she was living with her biological grandmother, a woman named Nan, in Asheville. They said she was happy. They said she was better off. But Jamie hadn't seen a photo, hadn't heard her voice. There was no address, no working phone number, just a story. And in that house on Miller Chapel Road, stories had a way of curdling. Erica, he told the officer, was a quiet girl, shy. The last time anyone could definitively place her in that house, she was 13 years old, a child. And for nearly 2 years, no missing person report was filed. Her absence was just another piece of furniture moved to a corner and forgotten. But here's the first fracture in the facade. While Erica was gone, the family kept receiving her Social Security and adoption assistance checks. $641 a month. Direct deposit. The money kept coming, and so the story of Nan had to be maintained. It was a financial fiction that required a living, breathing girl to be perpetually away, yet never found. When detectives first visited the Parsons, Casey and Sandy were ready. They were calm, affable even. Yes, Erica was with Nan. They'd taken her there themselves back in 2011. A road trip. Their biological daughter Brooke had come along, they said. But when detectives spoke to Brooke separately, she contradicted them. She never went on any trip to Asheville. The story began to buckle under its own weight. Casey offered to show messages from Nan on Facebook, but could never quite pull them up on her screen. She claimed the profile was deactivated. Nan, the spectral grandmother, had evaporated into the digital ether, taking the truth about a 13-year-old girl with her. The detectives left the neat brick house that day knowing one thing for certain. The official story was a house of cards, and behind it, the shadow of what might have really happened to Erica Parsons began to grow long and dark across the North Carolina pines. With the official story crumbling, investigators turned to the only things that don't lie: paper trails and physical evidence. They executed search warrants at the house on Miller Chapel Road. What they found was a study in eerie domestic normalcy, punctuated by chilling anomalies. In a closet, a section of drywall had been cut out and removed. The baseboards were gone. Red stains. They bagged a pair of jeans with similar stains. In another closet, they found a plastic bag filled with tabloid magazines and a book about John Benet Ramsey, the 6-year-old beauty queen murdered in her home on Christmas night. Inside the book, handwritten notes about home repairs. The parallels were unsettling, a morbid fascination sitting next to the spare linens. But the most telling find was an absence. There was no evidence Erica had lived there for years. No bedroom preserved for her, no recent school records, no clothes in the closet, no toothbrush in the shared bathroom. It was as if she had been meticulously erased from the home's ecosystem. Meanwhile, the financial investigation revealed the cold engine driving the deception. The Parsons bank accounts at Wells Fargo and Bank of America showed the steady clockwork deposits from the state and federal government for Erica's care. Adoption subsidy, Social Security, Medicaid. They were cashing checks for a ghost. The couple's attorney would later argue they were still her legal guardians entitled to the money. But the law expects guardianship to involve actual guarding. The pressure mounted. The 2 youngest children were removed from the home by social services. Casey and Sandy went on local television, pleading for Erica to come home. And in these pleas, detectives noticed a subtle, telling linguistic slip. Casey and Sandy always spoke about Erica in the past tense. Erica was a good girl. She loved animals. Her biological mother, Carolyn, who had given Erica up for adoption years before, always spoke in the present. "Erica is my daughter." The past tense is the grammar of loss, of concluded stories. And then the family began to talk, not to the cameras but to investigators. A portrait of life inside the house on Miller Chapel Road emerged, and it was one of grotesque, calculated cruelty. They said Erica was forbidden from calling Casey mom. She was Casey. She slept on the floor, not in a bed. She was forced to eat dog food or retrieve meals from the trash. She was punished by being locked in a closet for days. They spoke of broken fingers, of a hand held to a hot stove, of a bald spot on her scalp from repeated blows. Jamie, the brother who finally went to police, described the final time he saw her. She looked, in his words, like a zombie. Gray, sunken, covered in oozing sores. She told him she couldn't breathe. Casey's alleged response was, "I don't care. Go back to your corner." The next day, Jamie said, his parents were gone for hours. When they returned, Sandy was pale and nauseous. Casey was composed. They said Erica was with Nan. The story was now no longer just about a missing girl. It was about what happened to her in that house, in the years of silence before she vanished. The fraud case was solid, but the shadow now had a shape, and it was the shape of a tortured child. In the face of overwhelming evidence of fraud, the narrative of Nan finally collapsed entirely. Investigators discovered Erica's actual biological grandmother had died in 2005, 6 years before Erica was supposedly dropped at her door. The fictional caretaker had been dead all along. Casey and Sandy Parsons were indicted on a staggering 76 federal counts of theft of government funds, mail fraud, and identity theft. This was the lever. In 2014, they were sentenced to 10 and 12 years respectively. But this trial was merely about the money. The ghost of Erica Parsons hung over every proceeding. Her brother, her siblings, her aunt took the stand and painted a picture of hell in that suburban home. The judge, during sentencing, looked directly at Casey and said he believed they had done something horrific to Erica, that they were morally bankrupt. It was a judicial condemnation, but not a murder conviction. Erica was still out there somewhere. For years, the search continued. Age-progressed photos were released. Community vigils were held. Private investigators and volunteer search teams with cadaver dogs scoured the dense woods of Rowan and surrounding counties. It was an open, festering wound for the community. Then in 2016, a crack appeared in the dam of silence. Sandy Parsons, serving his federal sentence, wanted to talk. He offered a deal. He would take them to Erica's body. He led a convoy of law enforcement south, across the state line into Chesterfield County, South Carolina, about 40 miles southeast of Charlotte, to a patch of scrubland off a lonely road. The ground was dug, and there, in a shallow grave, wrapped in trash bags, were the skeletal remains of Erica Lynn Parsons. The little girl, last seen at 13, was finally found, 5 years after she vanished. Sandy, in tears, confessed the brutal, domestic truth behind the years of lies. He claimed Casey told him Erica had killed herself in December 2011, that they had panicked. They poured bleach on her body, bagged her, and stored her in a container. The next day, they drove to this remote spot. Sandy dug. Casey removed the girl's clothes. They buried her. Then they drove home and went to a Christmas party. The story of Nan was born that night, a tale crafted by Casey to explain the unexplainable. A story they would tell for years, all while cashing the checks. With the body found, the autopsy report was the final, horrifying testament. It spoke not of a single incident, but of a life systematically destroyed. Multiple broken bones in various stages of healing, ribs, arm, jaw, nose, evidence of severe chronic malnutrition and dehydration. One of her teeth was missing. The medical examiner could not determine the exact cause of death, given the state of the remains, but stated the history and injuries were consistent with a fatal assault. Blunt force, strangulation. The evidence of a short life ended by relentless, intimate violence. With Erica's remains identified and the cause of death ruled a homicide, the final act could begin. In 2018, Casey Parsons stood in a North Carolina courtroom. For years, her mantra had been Nan. Now she faced a judge to answer for murder. In a flat, emotionless voice, she uttered the words she'd fought for so long to avoid. Guilty. She pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and felony child abuse. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Before the sentence was handed down, she offered a meager apology. "I don't know why I did the stuff I did," she said. "I'm sorry." Her biological mother, Carolyn, sat in the gallery. She had long ago given up her daughter, believing she was giving her a better life. She didn't want the death penalty for Casey. She wanted her to live with it. "She gets to live," Carolyn said afterward. "But in return for living, she will probably be in solitary confinement. She gets to wonder, am I going to make it back to my cell tonight?" 4 months later, it was Sandy Parsons' turn. His defense argued he was a weak man, dominated and manipulated by Casey, that he was guilty of covering up a death, not causing it. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. "I turned a blind eye," he told the court. "I failed her as a dad." The judge sentenced him to a minimum of 33 years. He will be well into his 80s before he is eligible for parole. The monsters, as the district attorney called them, were finally caged. The house on Miller Chapel Road is just a house again. The financial records are filed away in evidence boxes. The story of Nan is a footnote in a case file, a pathetic fiction that delayed justice for years. But this case was never really about a fictional grandmother or stolen government checks. It was about what we hear in the quiet. The whimper from a closet mistaken for the house settling. The flinch of a child explained away as clumsiness. The past tense slip in a television interview. The grammar of guilt is subtle. It lives in the gaps, in the 2 years between a disappearance and a police report, in the space between a healthy child and a skeleton in the woods, in the chasm between the family you present to the world and the horrors you hide behind a closed door. Erica Parsons' story is a stark reminder that the most terrifying crimes aren't always committed in alleyways by strangers. Sometimes they happen in a beige brick house with tidy shutters, over years, in a relentless, quiet war of attrition against a child who just wanted to be called daughter. And it's a reminder that the search for truth often begins not with a bang, but with the simple, courageous act of a young man walking into a police station and saying, "My sister's gone," and the story they're telling just doesn't add up.